So in this video we will take a look at this very simple chair from Target and how we could rebuild it and what the best process for this would be. Specifically in this video we will touch on creating kind of like the wooden core, then actually the foam that goes around it, which will give our fabric the shape. There will also be a stitching and a seam we will cover. The foam will be slightly compressible, so we have to figure out how much, for example, can we press into the foam to figure out where maybe the wooden core would be. See, this is the top part. We will also take a look at how we can create this tube-like fabric element that goes completely around the chair. And we will also take a look at the leg construction, how the piping is done, where it is secured and fastened to the plate, including also how to design the caster and then position everything so it can swivel and rotate. For example, here you can see a side view of these casters. There, I removed it. Inside the Blender file, I put in already most of the necessary elements. So you can see there is the backrest, the seat, including some preliminary roundings for the corners. Here's our spline, because we will build everything flat and then we will bend it. I have here a spacer for the front and the back position of the casters. So I know exactly where the pipes will have to be. There is a small dimension line to define how far these two lines have to be apart from each other, including also a small sketch of, for example, the caster. And here, for example, I put in an idea for how the joint could look like. We will in this process still rebuild this part in a basic way so that during rendering or presentation it is functionally self-explaining. Obviously this is a stock part we might pick out of not a magazine, a catalog, so we don't necessarily design it ourselves in case there's something already on the market. But it's always good to, in a professional presentation or to be clear, to put these details in to a certain degree so that they are really self-explaining. Okay, so maybe we should start with those legs. I have here the position of my casters. So there are two ways now how we could actually start everything. And I will actually put my casters into the position first, because then the pipe later has to end at a certain position where the casters will be. So maybe in this case, we will continue by making a copy of those elements, because then I can go ahead, for example, here, subdivide it, delete it, and then there are already, I have the geometry to create a very basic representation of that joint. 64 steps. We can go really high here simply because we will not use the subdivision modifier to make it smoother, so just some higher steps so it renders fine. Because again, we will rebuild this one as accurately as necessary to tell our story, and then we don't have to do anything more because this will be a bought product. So here we can do the same. So these points we subdivide, then this I can remove. Here, for example, this one I can bring in and maybe move up a little bit. Okay, let's say we like this, and there, this one will bring back a little bit. Okay, and these points we can round with Control B. Oh, there's a scale factor, I think. Yeah, there's a scale factor. So in object mode, let's apply it. Let's do the same here. This one is applied. Okay. So again, Control B. Why doesn't it work? Oh, I'm kind of silly. Shift Control B, not Control B, because Control B rounds an edge and Shift Control B rounds a vertex. Wah, wah. It's early in the morning. So I can just set something as I want, and then I open my toolbar, go to the bevel command, and then let's say maybe 10 steps, so it renders nice and smooth. This is actually 1 centimeter. Yep, so I'm in metric, so maybe 0.5 to make it a little bit softer, so that's half a centimeter rounding. You also can see the grit. Now this is actually millimeter, not a centimeter, sorry, so half a millimeter. I don't know, maybe there we go with 1. It's nice and soft. And then to make this look a little bit smoother, we change the profile a tick. Okay, and then these 2 points, Shift Control B, we just break the edge a little bit. Okay, so for this part down here, we can select this edge, add a point via subdivision, and then we can round this one pretty big because that will be the sliding element. We can move this one up, and honestly at that point we can leave it because internal structure we don't see, and so in rendering or presentation what you don't see, simply don't put it in when we're not going to manufacture it, and just render it. And also here screw modifier 64. And let's take a look. And that looks pretty good. So we can easily see that there's a small gap, but the caster very often is this tiny, so as long as the camera doesn't get so close, it's not going to be any problem. And if we want to be nice and precise, we can actually round this corner a little bit. So yeah, that's nice and smooth now. Okay, perfect. So this is a joint, so actually it can rotate because this will have a threading that will go into the pipe. Let me go back to this image. There you see it. So this will always be parallel to the internal axis of a pipe. So it will be rotated at one point, and then the caster will be flush to the ground. Okay, so why did we do this? I will do the following now. So you and you, we actually Control P, parent everything to this part. And the main reason is now I can select all this, Alt D, move it to somewhere else, and I do it 4 times. So I have 4 clones, and then I start with positioning these objects. So cursor to that position, and then selection to cursor, cursor to selected, selection to cursor. So you see I'm positioning now all these casters at the correct point. There, okay. And I roughly have now an idea where, for example, the center point maybe of my pipe would be. So let's say this one would go in a little bit, and maybe from here this would go in there a little bit. So maybe where this point there is, I will start creating my sketches for my spline. So let me measure something. I'm curious where this object actually is. This is 8 millimeters. So I will set here everything to 0 and then 8.3 millimeters. Okay, and just create a plane. And this plane for me is just as a reference or a helper to visualize something. Okay, so let me hide this for a moment. So now I'm ready to create the splines. So I could maybe start with the back leg. So cursor to select it, go into top view, and let's add a Bezier spline. I will set everything to vector, this point, cursor, selection to cursor, okay, and then this one I will rotate around the 3D cursor 90 degrees. So it, for example, faces down. Okay. And then I can move this one to there. And you will soon see why I actually did this. Okay, so in object mode, I can now rotate this one. And then when I go into edit mode, and I still have local mode here turned on, you can see now that I can move this vertex and make my spline longer or shorter. And for example, it should be roughly there. Then maybe go into object mode and fine tune the rotation. There, and this seems to be pretty close. And we can bring this one back. Okay, so now you see I created a line from this point to this point. So let's say 3D cursor to the center because I want to double check if I'm really on it. Oh yeah, I'm pretty close. Perfect. Okay. So I have to get actually everything up. So I can select the complete spline, W, subdivide, and then either F6 or go to the toolbar, and then we add 2 points. And then these points we can move up, maybe till there, let's say. And then I have to move these corner points forward. And you see now, because I'm in local mode, I rotated my object 45 degrees, I think. That's why, yeah, 44. I can now easily make use of local mode and simply slide everything perfectly. I don't have to be concerned of moving it left and right. Okay, good. So, because Blender can have clones, I can Alt D, make a clone, move it to somewhere else, select this point, Shift S, cursor to select it, and then here say selection to cursor, and let's make this one minus. So now it's perfectly mirrored. Okay, you can also see where it intersects. Great. So that's kind of like our basic lag. And for example, here we can select this one and maybe in this view rotate it. Actually, we can select maybe both here, there. Rotate it at the same time. Maybe zoom in a little bit. There. And then here we have to do each individually. So that is 11.2. and there. I think this was 8. So also here can rotate this one, do the same there, and then go to side view, select both as you can see, and then rotate it. There, perfect. Okay, so as you can see now, I also have created, rotated all those joints or threading parts, so they're kind of like parallel to the pipe. Don't really have any piping yet, so let's do this in the next step. This object, I will Shift D, make a copy, because I don't have rounded edges here yet. I can't select a point and say Shift B to bevel it, because it doesn't work. So we have to do something different, and we'll use some interesting tricks here. So this top edge, so these 2 points I select, subdivide it 1 time, but I want it twice, because now I can move this and this, and then scale them apart from each other with S or YY, it's the same. And then we can also select this and this, this and this, subdivide it, and I want these points to be at the same height, so I will use a very crude trick. As you can see, I subdivided then these new segments 1 more time, so I get these points higher. So what was this useful for? Well, the thing is, I can delete now these corner points, and then these handles I can set to aligned, and I have, as you can see, rounded edges. So as it looks like, I can subdivide this 1 more time and then get rid of this. Now this is a really crude way to do it, but again, for a quick visualization, if you don't have a fillet tool or so, this is actually pretty useful. So now I will go to normal and, for example, push this point up. Same here. There, maybe I will push this out a little bit, and there. And let's take a look how the rounding looks. Okay, yeah, maybe this is a little bit too tight, so I soften this a little bit. There. Okay. So again, because in Blender we don't have a fillet tool for curves, but because we work with a spline tool, we have it kind of like built in. We just sculpt it. Okay. So this, maybe we can move to the first layer, because now we can add actually the pipe cross section, which I have back here. And then we can take a look at how this feels. Let's take a look at down there. Okay. So this pipe, maybe we want to duplicate, so Alt D. This is currently on the negative side of X, so we set this one to positive 25, and then this Z rotation we set negative, and there we have it, perfectly mirrored. Okay. I quickly want to select these parts here and hide it, and then also hide this. Nope, this spline, because I want to bring my casters over to the first layer. You, and you. Move to layer 1. Okay. There. So now we can zoom in and take a look if there are some issues, and there are. As you can see, the pipe intersects there. Not really ideal. But this is not going to be an issue because we also have a spline start and end command. So we can actually move this a little bit backwards. So this is maybe a tick too much. 0.0005. Ah, this is better. And then maybe here, let's see, click and shift. We can slide this back a tick. Maybe like this. Yeah. Okay. So let's double check how this all looks. Okay, this looks like a little bit too big. Maybe rather there, okay. And then here we can do this one more time. You see, because we work with a clone, they update all at the same time. Pretty nice. Yeah, maybe like this. Okay. Good. So, I would say for the beginning, this part is pretty close, and maybe we can keep it at this for the moment. So at this point now it makes sense to start actually with the harder wood part. So I have these two elements here. So the seat and the backrest. I will make myself two copies. Shift D. I'll move it to the second layer, and then actually I will join everything. Actually these edges I will remove. These points I will merge by remove doubles. Okay, and then actually for the moment I will say dissolve vertices A and F, so I have a flat shell. So why did I do this? When I go to here, we can see that there is a little bit of side material. So my wood part gets actually pretty close to the left and right side. So let's say this is roughly 5mm material. So I might have to shrink this wood part a little bit now. So I could press with this face selected the I key to do a face insert, and I can click and then T and go to my insert face command. So even offset, yes. I would like this one to be just 0.5 millimeter. Yeah, so you see this is now centimeters. This is now 5. Did I say 0.5 centimeter? Yeah, not 5mm. So now we here in millimeter view. So each square is a millimeter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so this is 5. Okay, good. So I can press P to separate. So for example, this part I can isolate, and this one maybe I move on to this layer. So this is actually now my plane for the wood part. I can add a loop cut and, for example, a center loop cut, and then I will prep everything to use a mirror modifier, so I have less work to do there. And then maybe add a subdivision modifier to round the edges, because now we will turn on the former display here. And now I can go ahead and say, well, please add a loop cut. I completely move it to the left side, and then G and X move it a little bit to the back, and then a loop cut here. there and a loop cut down there. Maybe something like this. Okay, maybe this point I can move in a little bit so you see it rounds this corner a tick more. Maybe the same there. And I can add another loop cut there, one additional loop cut there, and I bring it closer, not too close, just to straighten these sides a little bit. There. Okay, let's take a look. That seems pretty good. Okay. So let's assume, unfortunately I can't measure it, but I assume there will be not a centimeter, maybe centimeter, let's say 5 millimeters wood core that's inside. We will do an even thickness, high quality, offset to the top, so it actually grows away from the pipes, so it's not intersecting with the pipes. Okay. And we might now need to build our spline. So I make a copy of the spline, M and 2 to move it to the second layer. And yeah, so how do we do this? We can actually do the same trick with the fillet by subdividing this. This one I can move down, this I can maybe move closer, this one I can remove, select these two, aligned. This actually may be automatic or aligned. Yeah, so there. Okay, perfect. And then this one, and whoops, wrong key. Rotate a little bit there, so we get a little bit of a curvature. Maybe a little bit closer. Okay, good. So with this spline done, we can add the curve modifier to this wooden base. You see actually that my object has its local orientation X, so this spline is actually rotated along the Z-axis. So initially I created the spline and then I rotated the whole object, so it matches the growth of my wood plank, so that the spline X-axis is the direction of my wood plank. Okay, so use this to grow along. Perfect. Okay. And let's take a look from the side how this feels. Yeah, this is actually not too bad. I'm not sure about the curve. We will maybe be able to fine tune this later even more. At the moment, I don't know if the curve is too big or too small, because we also have to include the upholstered foam that goes over it. So this might mean that internally the curve is a little bit bigger, but to your hips, then obviously because the circle shrinks, it will get smaller. Okay, good. So let's maybe clean this up a little bit. Let's name this, and let's call this wood core. Okay, I think this is pretty good. Let's see if we maybe should put this one on top or below. It doesn't really matter. Okay, and that's pretty much kind of like what we have to do for the core. Now it's time to do the upholstered part. The nice thing of this process using the modifiers and having everything flat is we can also build our upholstered part pretty flat and then, well, make everything a little bit bigger. So I will do the following. I will make myself a copy of this part, and then let's go to here. Here we have actually an object that is 3.3 centimeters tall. That roughly describes the thickness vertically. So this wooden core that I made a copy of, we can call this one now maybe foam. We only have to adjust this one now to 3.3 centimeters. And then, because it grows directly from where the wood plate starts, we have to change the offset so it goes down a little bit till there. Perfect. I will move this one to layer 3. Let's take a look. So there you see, for example, now how this angle actually, not angle, that rounded corner gets bigger, smaller. See, this is pretty big, and here it gets pretty tiny. Okay, so this maybe should explain, or not explain, describe roughly maybe the basic foam. But this looks pretty blocky, not very good. So now we have to sculpt this stuff a little bit more. So Shift D, make a backup copy. I move this onto a different layer. And then we can see now what are possible options to do this. So first, I will undo this and then maybe show this, because this object is also not doesn't have the correct size. It is as big and wide as the wood. It has to be 5 millimeters bigger. So what is now an easy way to fix this? Thankfully, we have actually our original geometry there. So what I can do as a quick workaround, I will simply move this one up till it hits kind of like this 5 millimeter mark. And again, keep in mind, we work here with foam stuff and compressible materials, so we can get away with eyeballing something here now. And there. Okay. So this is now just a tiny tick bigger than, for example, our wooden core. And you see, it is now perfectly inside and enclosed. Okay, great. This actually should have been the copy to move to there. So here we just delete that smaller and to older one. Okay. Next step now, we have to round all these top edges to a certain degree, so we get this look like we have here, where this top edge is nicely rounded. And you see this is more a flat surface. So think about this kind of like as a filleted sharp edge. And here this is sharp. So let's see maybe what possible tricks we have here to achieve this. If we set this to 2 and then we add something afterwards, and 2, when I set this to 0 and 0, there, and maybe this, what's outer, nope, that's the wrong one, maybe there, or I see we can sharpen this a little bit, round this a little bit, and then bend this. So now we did a pretty quick study to see with the sharp edge in the back and the rounded edge in the front, but that doesn't really look very good. So we don't get around just having now to build the actual three-dimensional volume for this. So the solidify modifier I will apply, but first I will apply the mirror modifier and then the solidify modifier, and there we see now we have a nice and soft object again. So there we are. Let's take a quick peek and compare with our wooden part to see if it sticks in somewhere. It does. Later, actually, this front part also dips down. I'm actually curious how this would work out. Oh no, we could do it. Yeah, we can do it that way later. Okay, good. So we have to add a little bit of geometry at the bottom because this is too round now. So going to edit mode, loop cut, and maybe bring one loop cut down to, let's say, maybe there. And you see now that this lower area is being straightened and then the top remains nice and round. Okay, good. But this is, I feel like, a little bit too flat, so we have to adjust this geometry here. So in this case now, to make work again a little bit easier, we can simply delete this half and then add a mirror modifier and move it on top of our stack. So we have this other half again. Okay. Now these, not this one, these points I can all select. And what I'm looking for right now is this point. They all have to maybe, including this one, or not. Let's see, no, not this one. So those we move a little bit to there, okay. And then this, GG, and we just simply move it along there. And I'm curious if this maybe helped a little bit. Yes. Okay. So then also there, move this one down a little bit. And you, down a little bit. Let's take a look there. Undo and show. Can't really see much from there. Okay, yeah. Maybe GG, move this even further. Yeah, this is getting a tick better. Maybe actually even here, GG, I will move these points further away from this corner point so that I flatten kind of like that corner a little bit. So let's take a look, undo and show. Yeah, there you see that it gets rounder. Okay, and that seems to kind of do the job. Okay. Let's take a look. Yeah. Okay, I would say we run into some smoothing issues here, I just noticed. So what happens if we, no, this doesn't work. So we have some problems here. So what we will do is I will actually add a loop cut there and a loop cut there. And then an additional loop cut at the beginning before the bend command. So you see I added some extra geometry just for this rounding, and then I subdivided my mesh one time, then I bend it, and then here you can see the result, and then I can smooth it out one more time. But it's not perfect, so maybe one more loop cut there. Yeah, now it is flatter again. Okay, good. So that means I should probably do the same here. So one loop cut there, one there, an additional one. Let's see if this fits well. Okay. Yeah, okay. And they flow pretty much the same. Good. I hope this made sense, because the curve modifier will bend something, and as much geometry you can add to a mesh before we do the bend, the smoother the result. So if, for example, we turn off this, you can see that's all the geometry we have, and when we want to bend it, it will simply look like this. By the way, this is also a very good preview if you want to see where maybe for a bend you have to insert extra geometry. So that's what I'm doing here right now. So I only have geometry at needed positions there, because then I can actually get away with less subdivisions and still get a really nice and soft rounding. This curve I want to set to 32 so it's smoother, so my bending will actually be better. And then maybe here we do the same evaluation. Let's turn on the bend as a preview so I can see this needs a loop cut, and there maybe, and there maybe, and there maybe one there. See, I'm already pretty close, so then also here I don't need as many subdivision levels. So, and this one I have in the back, I could even completely remove. Yeah, so now you see this works much better. Great. Okay, so I would say our basic shell for the upholstered foam, maybe we could call good. I'm just curious if we select this one and maybe Gigi move this up a little bit. I would like to round it a tick more, because this is, I'm still bothered how flat this part looks like. So if we say take this out, but then this is too round. Okay. Plus we will have this tunnel object that flows around it there as well. Okay, let's leave it. So it's time now that we can build this seam here we have. And this is roughly a 5 by 5 millimeter cross section. Looks like a tubular part. So let's go back to Blender, and I'll show you a pretty nifty trick how we can do this. So I will select this loop I have here, and then I will press Shift D and escape. So we made a copy and moved it out, and press P to separate it. So there is this curve. Okay. Now the nice thing is, you see this is still part of the original mesh, so it's actually flat. And if I select it and move these points up and down, you see it will also be bent and then slide around my object. But the problem is, if I move it to there, you see I will get a gap. Not ideal. So how could I make sure that this one snaps onto the mesh? So in this case here, we can use the shrink wrap and also in this case with the near surface point option. Target is our foam. Okay, let's take a look. I see it fits. So let's go into edit mode, move this one up Let's zoom in and you see, dang, it snaps to it. Perfect. So we don't have to mess with the geometry and add something there. We simply can create this loop where we perfectly need it. Let's say somewhere there. Okay, good. So now how do we pipe this? Well, Blender for mesh modeling doesn't really have a pipe tool. That's good. We have something similar, and this actually comes from character modeling, and it creates a square's cross section. So what we do is with this mesh object selected, we will add the skin modifier, and then we will get something that looks like this. And then we can go into edit mode, AA, and then what was it? Control A? Yes, Control A, and we can change the diameter and a little bit more and more and more. So how much do we need? Here in this case, our small cross-section helper will do wonders, understanding how much it has to scale down. So this looks roughly like what we need. Okay, let's take a look at what we have. So you see it's a nice band actually, but the problem is this band is rectangular. Okay, not a big deal. We simply soften it. Let's first turn soft shading on, and then we say subdivide, and there it is. Now it is not perfectly round, so maybe one more, and there. We have a nice seam now. And again, if we go into edit mode and, for example, move all the mesh up, you see the shrink wrap modifier will snap it back onto the mesh, and then the skin modifier will create that matching geometry for us. Or move it down maybe to there. Okay. Let's see if we can't actually move this out a little bit. Because essentially this is a little bit of fabric and we stitch it down here together. So, and we have something in between, so that gives us this roundish look. So we will have to move this out a little bit more. And again, because we work here with upholstery, we can just simply simulate how a structure should look like. And I feel this is pretty believable. So you, from a distance, you will see that there is a seam around. And again, this is fabric. The pattern department will take maybe this conceptual idea and make a physical prototype, and then they will do all the manual pattern making by hand and then get the dimensions, etc. all correct. So I think in this case what we have here, this is really sufficient. So let's take a look, and yeah, there we now have the pipe, the casters, the foam, including a wooden part which we don't see right now, and then this seam element around it. So in the next step we have to do the stitching, and this is actually a really tricky part because we have this threading plus the holes and then the seam here. This is really difficult to do with a low density polygon model, because when we add extra geometry for the seam, our shell will deform and pinch there. And also we see all these small holes where the needle went through. This is also very difficult to do right, but we can actually simulate the position of the threading and maybe the way how it looks and where it is, and then I will show in sculpt mode how maybe we can create kind of like the seam and maybe the dots even. Okay, so let's go back. So somewhere here should be this seam. And let's work on the stitching first. So let's say I would like to work with this part here. So Shift D, Escape P to separate. Let's go back, and this stuff here, yeah, let's delete. Okay, good. And this also sits on it right now. So also there we will add a shrink wrap modifier to this foam part. The main reason is now I can select this and I should be able to move it left and right, and then it goes up and down. This is pretty fantastic actually. So I would like to clean this up a little bit first, because as you can see from the side, this has some issues. So here S and Y and 0, and there it is cleaned up. I will turn off the bend for the moment. So yep, this is nice and flat now. Okay, good. If I Shift D and make a copy, I can slide one copy down, and there I have the other part. Okay. So this is maybe now where I might have my stitching. Okay. I will need to have some extra points added. So let's delete this one. U, E, escape, and maybe I move it down the Z point a little bit. Yeah. So that I have a little point there, and maybe here this point I move up a little bit. Okay, I'm trying to shoot for that this last point ends actually behind this pipe element, so I don't see it. Okay, good. That's nice. So how do I proceed? Well, what we will do is we will build ourselves a small stitching array element, and then we bend it along a curve. So this, for example, what I have can be used to simulate maybe where my stitching should be. But because this is a polygon line, I can't really use it for the bend command. But I can actually take this and convert it into a spline. So that's what I will do now. Shift D, escape, and then let's see where the command maybe here is here. Convert to mesh, no, curve from mesh object, do it. And then when we go into edit mode, you see now there we have a very dense curve. And thanks to the subdivision modifier, it adds all these nice points, so it's nice and smooth. Also here, we can actually shrink wrap if needed to the foam part there, so it perfectly fits. I will move this one onto layer 4 and these polygon lines to this layer, so it's out of my view for the moment. And let's take a look at what we have. Okay, so first let's turn off the normals. Cursor to selected, L and P, and then for you, Shift, Control, Alt, cursor. So I set my pivot point there as well, cursor to selected, Shift, Control, Alt, C, and cursor. Okay. Cursor to selected, and then we have to build our stitching. Let's make a big cube. This cube, let's say, should be x 5 millimeters and maybe a millimeter and a millimeter, so a little bit thicker stitching. Alt A, apply the scale factor. Let's go to the array command and maybe 50, 1.2, 1.3. So think about here the holes. Okay, so now we have this really long line, and we will bend this over this curve. There. And we have already a very basic stitching. Obviously this looks pretty crappy because this is just a block, so we have to sculpt our stitching a little bit more. We can go into edit mode, add 2 loop cuts, and then maybe these ends we move down a little bit. There. And then we will see this is all nice, but now the stitching is not rotated correctly. So I will not do this in my stitching object. I will simply select my spline, AA, press Ctrl T to tilt my spline, so I kind of like rotate kind of its own axis, and then you see then by doing this I rotated the stitching elements. Perfect. Now they still look pretty blocky, so we can select this element and then say subdivide maybe twice. Doesn't need to be too much. This is just a small detail, and maybe we have to increase the number correctly. Maybe 65. Carefully we don't add too many. Oh, 65 was actually a good guess. Yeah, and there we have it. So let's do this one more time. So Alt D, I will make myself a copy. Cursor to selected, selection to cursor, override the curve, and use this one. And also here I have to select the curve, AA, Control T, and rotate my mouse there. So maybe let's call this one seam path 2. So it makes sense. Seam path 1. This is actually stitching 1 and stitching 2. Okay. That's also the reason why I do not like doing seams, all these things in Photoshop or Illustrator, because they're flat, and if I have a 3D model or something like this, then, well, you know, it doesn't take much to build a perfect seam, and then I simply render it out. And because these objects are three-dimensional, I can also shade them correctly, give them a nice material, etc. And yeah, it just will look better, more realistic. Okay, maybe let's hide these lines. And let's zoom out a little bit and take a look at what we have. Let's compare this with our object. So obviously the stitches in this reference here are much smaller. The thing is, the threading nearly fades away. You really have to zoom in, so that's difficult to do with CG. So we have to kind of like make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. We can actually make it also tinier, but what we cannot do is now create all the fabric deformations by the stitching. So this is kind of like a small limitation to it. Actually, we could sculpt it in, but that's actually a lot of work, and maybe not necessarily that much of a detail that's so important to do. Only when we, let's say, really go in, that maybe this area we can sculpt better. But for product rendering, most times you will see it from there, so it will be fine. Plus the stitching shouldn't really jump into your eye, it should be more in the background. However, we can sculpt this very small, tiny seam in here. So instead of building this geometry, we actually use the sculpt tool and press geometry in. And for example, even those bumps we have here, we could do either with the displacement modifier, or if we only need it at certain locations, we can do it with the sculpt mode. The sculpt mode is also very good for fabric when we have to build wrinkles. So here is actually now my main object. I will Shift D, make a copy and put it to layer 5. And I go to side view and I will introduce you to the sculpt mode. But before we do this, we have to say bye-bye to the subdivision modifier and apply the mirror modifier. Then we are back to this really basic block, and then instead of the subdivision we will use the multi-res. We can subdivide it, and you see this actually works similar to the subdivision surface modifier. So we have for preview and for render, and we have here in addition something for sculpt. The way how this basically works, I will show you just in a second. We can kind of like with a brush paint over our objects and then push and pull geometry. And then based on how fine this mesh is, we can sculpt finer or coarser details. So for example, here with these steps, we can now sculpt, let's say, on something that looks very coarse, so more proportional design. And when we go to, let's say, a sculpt of 4, then we can sculpt finer details. Okay. But before we continue, there's one thing we have to adjust. Because now I have no subdivision before my curve modifier. In this case, I have to really by hand add extra geometry. And I simply do this with Control R and then add at certain strategic locations just some extra loop cuts so that it is nice and round. And there you see we're very close to the original design. And again, we're doing here foam and upholstered stuff, so a little bit of deviation is more than okay. Great. So now how does actually the sculpt mode work? I will show myself this the stitching, and I see the stitching actually is off because it's using the wrong object now. So what I will do first, go to this one and go to this one there, and then I will apply actually this shrink wrap there, because then with the spline adjusted you will see the stitching adjusted. Okay, so now I have a rough idea where maybe I would like to put my seam in, and let me show you now how that sculpt mode works. It's pretty simple. So we select our multi-res object, go into sculpt. Let's open the toolbar. We have brushes. So like we can add clay strips, we can crease, we can fill gaps, flatten, grab, deflate or inflate, smooth, sculpt, scrape, pinch edges, mask, layer stuff, etc. And I will work with the smooth command. You will see here we have a radius and strength. This is also this can be used with a graphic tablet. So based on your pressure, you adjust this value. In the 3 view, if you press F, you see we can adjust the radius, and with Shift F we can adjust the strength. So if I now left click and drag, you will see that it adds geometry to it. But it's not really extruding, it's push and pulling. If I go with subtract, I can push it in. And if I make this tinier, see it's smaller details. If I zoom in, it's even tinier detail, but now the mesh is not big enough or fine enough at that zoom level to do it. But if I zoom out, you see the detail gets bigger. So The size is actually more relative to your object, how far you zoomed in or out. So that is actually rule number one you have to keep in mind. And we have add and subtract. Oh, there's a symmetry, for example, we can use. There are some curve options, and what we will use here for stroke is the line command. So, because fortunately this is pretty much a nice straight line, let's zoom in and then let's see if we can draw a line kind of like where we need it to there. So there's, we sculpted in kind of like this seam. I would like this one to be visible, so I put it to layer 4, there and there. Okay, yeah. Well, you see already it wasn't too difficult. So if we go back and undo it, we could also zoom in. So now we have to increase the brush size, for example, to be able to sculpt these parts. So what you have to be careful of is when we do this multiple times that, well, you want all these strokes to line up nicely. And also again, be careful with your zoom, because this now will be a pretty big line, or here. There you can see how big I made this line. So it takes a little bit of playing around. If you have a steady hand or a graphic tablet, we could also maybe turn this one into the dots, for example. Zoom in. And this is too much strength, so let's lower this. Maybe 10. Okay, in this case here, I think I might need to have a higher. I'm already at 5 now. Okay, I won't just keep it this way. There. So I can brush this a little bit by hand, go over it and over it, but you see with a mouse it's kind of crooked. So not really ideal. So let's see actually if maybe we can't improve this area, and what I will do is I will just artificially add there more loop cuts, so that my sculpt command right there will give me more vertices to play with. At least that's my hope. And yeah, you can see now that this area got actually a little bit denser. There's a finer mesh mesh now. So there's, I can do a crisper line. Okay, so with this actually there, it does reshape. No, I will actually delete the subdivision. This one can go, and then I go back to the multi-ras afterwards. Control 5. So I switch to a level 5 subdivision for my multi-ras. Then let's go back to line. Okay. Shift spacebar, full screen. Let's go to a nice view, and then let's try to find the correct angle. This is maybe a little bit too high. Oh, way too strong, so maybe this. I will make a quick test. Yeah. So maybe a little bit smaller, a little bit stronger. Yeah, see, that actually maybe feels a little bit better. So now let's make this line there. Okay, so here this fades out a little bit. We can get away with it because maybe I will cover there. I could go ahead now, and then in this case, because this is a really tiny part to adjust by hand, I will switch back to dots and nope. For example, adjust my stroke. Whoa, too big. A little bit smaller. Yeah, this is correct. Softer. Yeah, maybe there. Same then maybe here. There, okay, nice. Yeah, and we can leave it this way. And then we go into object mode. You will see, well, where is it? It's gone. No, it's not. It's just hidden. So we can actually show different previews, and you see with each preview, we will get a bigger or smaller representation of the detail. So we soften actually it afterwards a little bit. So question is, do we really need like 5, this high res, or is maybe 4 or 3 still sufficient? And then for rendering, we also could say, well, just render it with 4. Okay, so that's a little bit about how to do the sculpting. And you see it works actually pretty fast. The line is still kind of too big, but this is okay. Could fine tune this a little bit more, or again, based on from how far you see an object, you might have to make in detail also a little bit bigger so it pops better. And I mentioned that there are some details here, so kind of like these bumps or so. So how could we do something like this? So same idea. We go back to the sculpt mode and then maybe make this pretty big. This has to be really soft now, and then is symmetry turned on? Yes, symmetry is turned on. That's not what I want. So there, zip, zip, and maybe add a little bit smaller. So you see, we could actually play crazy around. I just do some interesting patterns here, and then, for example, we could go with the smooth command there, and then, for example, fade those out. Pretty strong smooth command. So if there was too much detail, we can remove it. So think about this tool like digital clay. We could also maybe go into 2, so it's a rather coarse object, and then inflate and deflate. So here, see, I just add some randomness to the site and the structure. The value is right now a little bit too big. I just simply did it so you can easier see it. So instead of using a displacement modifier, we can then, because we already work with the multi-res, we can simply sculpt it. And then we're in more control. Okay, that's basically how you can use the sculpt mode. So here's a simple trick how we can design the sides nicely and symmetrically. Yes, so this is a different approach. I will turn on the symmetry, and then I would have to maybe play around a little bit with this value try to see what looks good. Okay, let's zoom out. Yeah, this is maybe a tick too deep. So maybe tick smaller, Shift F, maybe less strong, and from there to the center. Let's zoom out. Yeah, this maybe looks good. Okay, and because we have the symmetry turned on, the other side is done. Now I can turn this off. Go into top view, zoom in decently, and all I have to do now is figure out the correct size. So for example, to there, and then the strength. And then maybe find a good position where these three strokes could overlap. Yeah, I'm getting close. Maybe tick there and there. Yep, this is actually good. Let's zoom in. The strokes overlapped well. We can see here it's a little bit flatter, but again, this is something you only see when we zoom in, and when we zoom out, you won't really see it. Okay, that was a small workaround or trick how to do symmetrical parts then with this symmetry. So the last pieces that maybe might be good to put in are maybe those plastic brackets. And we can go to there, go to view from below. So how do I line this one up? So I can go to here, Shift S cursor to select it, and then I will maybe create a cube, scale this cube down. Okay, so how much is this rotated? There, that amount. So let's do the same there. So then I can move this one down, or actually up. And you see now, because I started from the origin of the pipe, I can simply now nicely slide it along. So we can now start sculpting these parts. Actually, the wood surface might help in this case to be visible there. So a little bit lower, maybe like this. Okay, yeah, this is good. XX there, and maybe let's go up a little bit there, and we can move this one in a little bit more. This is currently Y. Let's say this is 3 centimeters. Yeah, size wise that looks similar. So we have to add those rings to it. So for the moment, what will be easier is to undo the rotation. Then Shift S cursor to select it. Let's add a circle. Because this is going to be a very basic dummy model, I simply put in a polygon circle in, which is not very precise, but more or less doing what I need. Let's make this a tick bigger. Okay, good. So, and then with my vertex snapping, I can snap it to this point. Shift D, Y, vertex snap to this point. And then these two rings I will join to the cube. And then I will select those two cube faces, delete, and then maybe make a loop cut and a loop cut. And you will see why I do these loop cuts, because then I will say U, U, F, U, U, F. Same there. Whoops, careful with moving stuff. F, F. And then I can select all these points and say fill. this complete half and fill. There, perfect. We can actually bridge this, so we loft it there, and maybe this we can pinch a little bit there. Okay, and then what was that rotation? I think I copied it there. Perfect. So now we have this element back, and then we can position it. So there's number one. Alt D, let's make a copy. So this has to be minus, and then this has to be positive. Now we rotated it, Alt D. Let's move this one maybe to there. And then Alt D, and then here we simply swap out the values in terms of positive and negative, and there. So there we have, for example, the basic representations for those plastic elements we can use to secure the pipe through. And in case this is too big, we can still select it, and then in edit mode SYY, scale it down there. And then all these parts are updated all at once. So you see, this is actually a quite interesting approach, because we mix kind of like precision modeling. So for example, the pipe diameter, etc., and then the wood board, and mix that more with digital clay sculpting, because essentially the pipe and the wood part I can easily do in any CAD application. I might not as easily be able to adjust, for example, the thickness and then bend it as easily as I can do it here right now, but I can get pretty close. But where something like Alias or Rhino will be very inefficient at is doing this with soft goods. Now I can build obviously this part in Alias, but it will take more time, and then if I have to do a quick design change, I kind of like would have to start from scratch. So the Alias Rhino Fusion approach is more or less only good when you have figured out the design, but for the quick ideation phase, it's not really, with a product like this, ideal. And I used this process in multiple projects to start the conceptual phase, and then in Rhino and SolidWorks, we then flashed out the final CAD models so it could go into production, and it worked out pretty well.